Welcome back to Monday Mod Tips. I'm Captain Xavier, and today we're going to be doing a complete disassembly and reassembly of the Nerf Alpha Trooper. This will also work for the reshelled orange Alpha Trooper, as well as far as I'm aware, the Accu Trooper, which has the same internals. The only difference is it has a barrel lug, and the original Alpha Trooper did not. But let's take a look at the locks first. This is very similar in some respects to like the Retaliator, but having slam fire means there are a few differences. For instance, there is never a lock on the trigger. You are always able to pull the trigger no matter where the slide is. And then once it's primed all the way forward, it will then fire. And if you hold down the trigger when you prime it, it will fire again when you get full forward. That's what's known as slam fire, and that is one of the more complicated mechanisms that are in here, and one that can cause some problems. There are, however, a few other locks. There is a mag release lock. You cannot pull the mag release and remove or add a magazine unless the blaster is fully primed. Now that it's back, now you can see that the mag release will in fact work, and we can in fact add or remove a magazine. If it moves forward even a little bit, you no longer can. But you are able to move the slide back up until the point where it goes all the way forward. Once it goes all the way forward, this will now lock into place until you fire it. Now when you're slam firing, of course, that lock never really engages in any meaningful way. It's going to get released the moment you fire it. There is also a lock on the jam door. The jam door cannot be opened if the bolt is not, if it's not all the way primed back. If it goes forward even a little bit, and you close it, it will now lock. You pull it back and it will release again. If you push it forward, it will close itself and then lock. So that's just another one of the locks to keep in mind. But I believe that is all the locks. So slam fire works, non-slam fire works, and both of our two locks are working. So let's get this thing open and take a look at how all of that works. We'll start by removing screws. Let's see if we have any weird shaped ones, odd lengthed ones. There are almost certainly going to be some that are different lengths, but I'm not sure which ones. We're going to need a smaller screwdriver for some of this. That feels like that might be a longer screw. Let's see if we can get them out. They don't want to come out. There's 5 holding our slide in place. But they are all the same length. Nope, those are longer. So the 3 on the bottom are longer than the 2 on the top. So be aware of that. We will also take off the back end early because that murdered you. Interesting. Unlike some other blasters, the screws on the back here are not larger. On some, the screws that hold the stock cap on are a much larger, coarser threaded screw, but these seem to be the same standard length and size. Alright, those front 2 here are considerably smaller, and then the lower ones are that standard length. Alright, we got another small one down here in front of the magazine well, was the mid-sized one. I'm willing to bet the 2 up here, oh, the ones up there are missing! I am not the first person to open this blaster. So some of these screws might in fact be in the wrong place, and I apologize for that if screw placements are wrong. Just be aware, pay attention when you're taking the screws out. Make a note which ones went where. There's a number of techniques for doing that. There is just a bunch of screws missing. I was not expecting that. Okay. I think that's all the screws that are here. Not all of the screws that are supposed to be here. we are in. Alright, well, it is a mess in here. This is an older Alpha Trooper, Elite Alpha Trooper. I don't know if I referred to it as the Elite Alpha Trooper at the beginning of this. This is an Elite Alpha Trooper, so it is the direct plunger version, and not the original Alpha Trooper, which is reverse plunger. Hopefully you are all aware of that, and I won't get 100 comments telling me I got the name wrong, because there are people who feel the need to do that. Okay, so we're going to start taking stuff out. The early easy stuff, there is the little dart holder that's in the handle, so that you can, you know, put a magazine in, prime it, fire it, and then put that dart in the bottom so you're not sitting with a... It's loaded and there's a magazine in it, but it isn't primed, since you can't deprime it. We'll take out the main spring, which is nearly so impressive in these, but they did the job. Let's take the barrel. Well, the front barrel is screwed in place. Pair of the really short ones again. Interesting. Barrel and the barrel cap. It's just a cover that they did in a separate piece, so they wouldn't have to, I don't know, I guess they decided that was easier than painting it. Oh, this thing is just filthy. No wonder it sounded so crusty when firing it full. All kinds of mess. Let's take our catch out. It's a decent catch spring. I wonder if it's been upgraded. Who knows? Who knows anything? Get our jam door out of the way. And... oh, interesting. So in order to get this, which is both our magazine lock and our our jam door lock, we have to take... no, we could have gotten that out without taking that out, but I'm going to take it out anyway. Let's see. Looks like we need to take the dart tooth out. So there's our dart tooth retention, our spring, our dart door. Alright, now we can get this whole... Can we get this whole assembly out? No, we can. Which is our bolt, our plunger, which can come off, priming rod, bolt sled, bolt, and the locks, which could be gotten off of there if you wanted to. In fact, I will, just so we can demonstrate that. Our magazine lock, which I often won't actually remove, but we will go ahead and take that out as well. I assume this is our slide lock. Yeah, that's going to be the slide lock. And those are some long and beefy washer-headed screws. That feels unnecessary. That one is much shorter. Okay. Try careful not to spring your springs when you take all of these out. And the trigger is a smaller washer-headed screw. Our rail lock. Trigger comes out. And now we have whatever that is. It's definitely some kind of a lock. Probably that might be the slide lock, and I might have no idea what that other part is. I'll figure it out, I promise. Another same washer headed. Okay, and this is also going to have springs in it, so be careful. And wood chips. Okay, there's one spring-loaded piece and one... oh, no, two spring-loaded pieces. Hopefully I can figure out how this goes back together. Okay, now that is stripped to the shell and dust and a spring that I'm not sure what it goes to. That is very alarming. that may have ran. Okay, there it is. Careful with the springs. There are a lot of springs in this blaster, it turns out. On the far side, we just have the other magazine release, which I'm just going to leave on there because it doesn't attach to anything. Alright, now we can start reassembling, and we're going to start with that last lock that we took out that I would almost recommend leaving in. But in the event that you took it out, here's how it goes back in. We're going to start with this part, which is sort of the housing. And into it, we are going to insert this part. And it goes in there in a strange and convoluted manner that I'm having trouble even doing. Okay. It goes in there. Hopefully I can get a decent picture. Like this. So it's in that so that the nubbin sticks out. Spring on the far side of the hook. The next piece fits in on top like so. So it's going to go in with the point sticking up in that configuration. And then the whole thing slides down right into there. And now, when you push down on this nubbin, it locks down until you push on that one, which will then pop it back up. So that is, I would assume the lock is now unlocked, and when this goes forward, it locks it. And that's probably part of our slide lock, but we will find out here in a minute. We will see exactly what that does, because I'm not 100% sure. This part is then held in place by one of the black washer-headed screws. Should be two of them, one for this and one for the trigger. Use the right size screwdriver so as to not strip it out. Okay, now we are going to put in the trigger, and I'm putting these parts in this order so that you can clearly see how they all interact and how the slam fire works. Trigger is also Trigger is held in place by the other one of those black washer-headed screws. It goes in right there, and we pull it, and obviously it does nothing. The next thing we're going to put in place is this part, which is the catch, and it goes right back here. Now in most blasters, the catch and the trigger are directly linked. So when you pull the trigger, it releases the catch. But as you can see, they don't connect. They're not connected at all at this point. And that is why you can pull the trigger and it won't automatically release the catch, because there is another piece that goes in between them that determines whether or not pulling the trigger actually makes the catch release. And that part is this piece, which is a fairly busy part. In addition to being the connection between the trigger and the catch, it also is involved in one of our locks. And it's a lock that I didn't actually realize was there when I was showing off the controls. And I don't know if it just wasn't working because of grit or what have you, or if I just didn't realize it existed because I didn't end up engaging it. I'll show it at the very end. But this lock here, that first part that we installed, is kind of a slide lock. It locks it so that once you've pulled the thing back halfway, it won't let you release it until you've pulled it all the way. But now, with this part in place, now we can clearly see, oh, and also this is held in place by the larger of the washer-headed, or the shorter of the two large silver washer-headed screws. Keeps this part from falling out. Now we can see how the link to Slamfire works. When this is pulled all the way forward, in addition to having the tab on it that releases that little lock you can see pop up there, It also now creates the link between our trigger and our catch, so that when we pull the trigger, our catch releases, as you can see there. It also means that if this is forward, it also means that if you have the trigger pulled and you pull this tab forward, it will then essentially be what releases the catch. So that is how Slamfire works, is that this arm is linked to the priming handle, and when the priming handle goes forward, it either connects the link or it actually releases it because the trigger's already pulled. So this part is important. That lock underneath there is not necessary, and if you felt like removing it, you could simply pull it out, and I don't believe it'll hamper operation much at all, though you might end up double loading or jamming if you're not careful. That's what that lock is there to prevent you from doing. It's preventing you from priming multiple times without actually fully priming the blaster. All right, next thing we're going to put in is our magazine lock and our mag release, I suppose. And it involves this little tab and this part and its spring. Tab gets installed on the back side. It has a notch that kind of tells you which way is the correct direction, and then this comes in top of it. Doesn't have a whole lot of movement. And we've got our spring that comes in there now. Doesn't appear to be any kind of a spring retention pin like we see on some other blasters, and that may be that there used to be one and it's just missing from this one because it was opened by someone else. But that is now our mag release. Now I believe we are ready to install the main guts, the bolt sled, and all of the parts that are attached to it. So we have our bolt sled, which has our priming rod attached to it. It is held on with a single screw on the far side that I did not remove. If you wanted to replace this because you've got an upgraded one, there's just the one screw right there that holds it in place. We do need to install this piece, which is two different locks, and I'll show how exactly those work. It has, as you can see, a cutout on the bottom. That needs to be facing down into the shell. So if the blaster is facing forward, it needs to be down. We're going to insert it up under the bolt sled and over the bolt. We then have our plunger tube and plunger, which you'll notice the plunger is captive in the plunger tube. There is a cap on the back that holds it in place, and that does need to be there because the plunger tube needs to be able to move. And it needs to be held back when the blaster is primed. And so when the plunger gets forced back and gets caught on the catch, it also holds the plunger tube back. But when the whole assembly goes forward, the plunger tube is forced forward slightly also, and this little tab on the bottom will hypothetically disengage a lock. At least that's how it works on other blasters. I assume that's how it works here. We're going to find out. So that tab needs to be facing down, and then we can install all of this mess. And it's a little finicky to get it all in there. There are a pair of grooves that the plunger goes into, that allows it to move back and forth in its little slot, like I said. This should be in its channel and should move appropriately. It can't go forward now because we have a lock engaged. Don't forget the spring on the bottom. This is one of those little finicky springs that likes to spring. And so that acts as two different locks. That is both our magazine release lock. So when it is up, you cannot pull the mag release. When it is forced down, you can. It is also our jam door lock. So when the jam door is forward, we put our jam door in here now at this point, you can see that it gets locked by that tab as well. And when it is pulled down, then we can open our jam door, as well as our mag release. And this is actuated by this tab on the bolt sled. So when the bolt sled comes back, that tab forces down that lock, which releases, or unlocks the mag release and unlocks the jam door. So that is how that works. Then when the bolt sled comes forward, or we can't come forward yet because we have that little tab under there is down. There is a tab on the far side of the bolt sled, which is what forces this lock into place. So now that we're all the way back and everything is caught, this releases. When this slides forward, now we can get over that lock because it's currently down. And then as we go all the way forward and we pull the slam fire linkage forward, it releases that little tab in there again. So there's two notches on the bolt sled. The first one is shorter and will get caught by that tab under there, but doesn't lock it down. The second one you can see coming in right there, that is what actually forces it down far enough to lock. And so now we can get back forward again. And then releases again. Final part for back here is this part. And this is the slide lock. And it goes down underneath, get its spring in place, and it is then held in place by that rather ridiculously long washer-headed screw. And this is the final piece of the puzzle. As this gets moved forward, that pops up into place and locks the slide. So the slide cannot go back and forth while this is up. When you release the plunger, it forces, not only does it force the plunger forward, but it forces that entire plunger tube forward. And remember that little tab on the plunger tube, that disengages that slide lock. The plunger moving forward disengages the slide lock, and now we can reprime the blaster. So that is how all of the locks work. Now obviously both of the slide locks can be removed. They are not necessary to the function of the blaster, but they will make it easier for you to accidentally jam things. Those exist there to make sure that you don't double prime, which if you don't have a sealed breach, obviously would cause problems because you already have a dart in the bolt. If you then try to shove another dart in the bolt, it's not going to fit and you're going to break your dart door or your dart tooth or jam the blaster in general. And if various locks have engaged when you do that, then you're not going to be able to clear the jam. And so that's why those exist. You also can technically remove this part, the mag lock and the jam door lock. You could also cut down the tabs on the top so that that you wouldn't have a jam door lock, but you might still have the magazine lock. The magazine lock is there to keep you from trying to pull the magazine out or put a magazine in when the bolt is forward, because the lips on the top of the magazine usually won't fit. That's another thing. Some people will modify either the bolt or the magazines, or they're using magazines that are more flexible or what have you. There may be reasons that you want to be able to remove that. So that can be removed and left out. Those two locks can be left out. And that's pretty much all the locks that are in this thing. So now we can move to the front of the blaster and install what's going on up here. And it all kind of goes in together. It all kind of locks into place. The first thing you can install is the shroud. That just covers that top just to give a little bit more color. We then have our muzzle, barrel, and dart door assembly, which has our dart door there. That all is going to need to go up under that shroud. And the bolt needs to be back for you to be able to install this. And there's a pair of holes in there that goes into, so it should lock into place. We then have a pair of the smallest screws holding in our muzzle. And finally, we're going to install these two parts. We have the dart tooth and the dart tooth retention nub, if you will. The dart tooth is going to go in there so that this tab is on the upper side. Usually it's on the bottom side, but we've got the priming bar on that side in this particular design. This is going to interface with this surface on the bolt sled. So when it comes forward, it unlocks the dart door after, this locks the dart door closed so that it will force the dart into the chamber, and then once it's pushed all the way forward, this will cause it to unlock both so that you can actually fire a dart through it. And then we have our little retention nubbin that just keeps it from getting out of alignment. It also uses a small screw. So now when we'll have to go all the way back, lock that lock so that we can go all the way forward. So you can see it interfaces there and it forces it down. It kind of locks slightly into place, and that lets you know that you're all the way in battery. We also have the slide lock has engaged to make sure that that is all in place. So that is how the internals work. I don't know how much of that you were actually able to see there. Sorry about that. We'll try that again, in fact, just to be sure. When we release it, bolt goes forward. Plunger releases the bolt, or the bolt sled. When the plunger tube goes forward, it releases the bolt sled lock, which then allows the dart tooth to lock the dart door. This all comes back. It crosses over that lock, but doesn't actually disengage it. So that is now locked, and we can't go forward anymore. We go all the way back, and now that does in fact lock down. Our plunger locks into place. At this point, our mag release and our jam door are unlocked, but as soon as we go forward even a little, now they both lock again. This continues all the way forward. It loads a dart into the chamber. It then disengages the dart tooth, which a dart door lock, that goes forward. It then releases that catch, and the bolt is now locked, and the plunger link now is linking the trigger to the release. So when we pull the trigger, it releases, and the cycle continues. So that is the full system. We are going to release it so that it's not going to cause problems. And this is the configuration you want it in when you reassemble it, because all of the locks are in their proper positions, either locked or disengaged as necessary. We do have two additional parts. We have our top rail little nub, and we have our handle dart storage part. And now we can reassemble. Now remember, your shell should go together easily. If it's not closing up without any gaps when you go to put it together, then something somewhere is misaligned, a spring has come loose, something, and you need to go back in and check and make sure you're not crushing a screw or something's out of whack or something like that. So we are now going to start putting in the screws that I have. As we discovered, I was missing a couple of screws, but we'll start by putting the end cap on because that'll hold the shell and the back end together. And then we're going to put the two tiny screws up here in front. At least I sure hope that's where they were supposed to be. We then had one shorter screw that was right here in front of the magwell. And while mine were missing, I would be willing to bet just about anything that the two screws that went in the top rail would also be those slightly shorter ones. As it was, mine, only the last two short ones that I have, were in the top section of the prime, which is also a very narrow section, so it would need the shorter screws, or you end up punching a hole through the far side with your screw. Do have a couple of screws right here that I'm going to put in. You could probably access them by priming it, but I want to put them in first. And once again, to remind you, always rotate back counterclockwise until you hear it click, feel it clunk into place, so that you don't cross thread and strip out your screw posts, and then your screws won't actually hold the shell together anymore. Now I'm kind of going to arbitrarily pick which screws I put back in. Other than the two top ones in the rail, the rest are probably all the same size standard screws. As I said, I was surprised that the two back here were standard and not larger, coarser thread, as you see on a lot of the rear caps, but apparently they felt like getting a little bit more standardized, which I appreciate. Right, and now for the moment of truth. Does it still work? Well, it does move back, so that's something. It does fire. Now, that one lock that I didn't test at the beginning, when you partially prime it, there it is. So we can't go forward once we come halfway back on the prime until we go all the way back. It catches, and now we're free to slide back and forth until we go all the way forward. At which point, we are now locked. Jam door is locked. Mag release is locked, but we fire, bring it back, mag release is released, jam door is released, trigger doesn't do anything, and if we hold the trigger down when we go forward, when it gets all the way forward, closes the jam door as we go, and fires. There it is, the complete disassembly and reassembly of the Alpha Trooper. The survey for which ones I do next is still down in the description, though at this point it's pretty much determined what the next 20 or so are going to be. We are going to be getting into some of the more complicated ones like the Artemis and the Hades, and that should be interesting. But do feel free to vote on ones just to let me know which ones you really want to do. Add ones that aren't there. Be sure to check which ones I've already done before adding one, because it may not be on there because I've already done it. But hopefully this was helpful to some of you. Thank you guys for watching.